In this tutorial, we're going to build on what we have learned in the previous tutorial. Mainly, we're going to create a nice user interface for the user that displays the running distance score and the coins collected score. We'll also create a death menu that prompts the user to either respawn the game or exit. Finally, we'll display a congratulatory text to the user if he beats his previous best scores. You can see that we have a packed tutorial, so let's jump right in. Open up the game scene from the scenes folder. Let's fix our scene view by double-clicking on the player game object. Then add a new canvas game object so that we can pin our different UI elements on. Be careful not to make the canvas game object children of the player game object. Change the UI scale mode of the canvas to scale with screen size because we want our different UI elements to look the same on different screen sizes. And our reference resolution should remain a 1920 by 1080. Let's double-click on the canvas game object to make it the focus of our scene view. Our first UI element is going to be a UI image that's going to display the user's running score. But before we add it, let's go to the main project's assets folder and inspect the button.png image asset. This image is included in your starter kit package. From its inspector window, change its texture type to Sprite, 2D and UI, and then hit apply. And now we're ready to pin it onto our canvas. Right-click on the canvas game object and then add an image game object from the UI menu. Let's drag this core displayer image onto the source image field of the newly created UI image game object. And here is our image being displayed on the canvas. Let's anchor our UI image game object on the top center of the canvas from its anchor presets menu while holding down the shift or option keys. Also, let's make our image wider from the width field of its rect transform component. Let's make it 220. And let's rename this UI image game object to distance score image. And let's add a regular text UI game object to the distance score image game object. Let's name it distance score text. And we want to stretch it against the area of the canvas that's occupied by the distance score image game object in both the vertical and horizontal directions from its anchor presets menu. Hold down the shift or option key and select this preset. Let's change the text color to white so that we could see it, and align it in the center of the area occupied by the image and put it in the middle. Now let's go to the fonts folder and drag the San Francisco Fedora titles font on the font field of our distance score text game object. Let's change the text size to 36 points so that it's big and clear. Looks cool. And let's put a random integer as a placeholder in the text field, say 9999, until we change it from the player control script so that it displays the updated distance run integer. Save the changes and hit play. Okay, so it looks like our distance score text is not perfectly centered inside the UI image. So let's double click the distance score text game object from the hierarchy to bring the scene view closer to it. Let's select the move tool and then move it a bit to the right and then a bit down like that. Although I'm not sure if it's perfectly centered in the image. So this takes care of the distance score UI. The only thing left is to update the value of the text input of the distance score text with the user's running distance, which we will do in a bit from inside the player control script. Now let's work on the coin score UI. Double click on the canvas game object to see the entire canvas from the scene view. Go ahead and add a panel game object to the canvas. Select the rect tool from up here and resize the panel so that it takes a rectangular corner of the canvas, like so. So now we've reserved this area for canvas for the coin score UI. Let's make sure that our panel is anchored on the top left corner of our canvas. And did I say that you must hold down the shift or option key for the anchor presets menu? Let's turn off the panel image component. And let's rename our panel to coin score panel. Now let's add a UI image game object to the coin score panel, and we want to anchor it left of the panel, like so. Now we're ready to add our gold coin image that's going to indicate to the user what is it that he's collecting. Make sure that our newly added UI image is selected from the hierarchy. Then go to the models folder and drag the gold coin image asset to the source image field of the UI image game object, like so. And don't worry about converting it into a sprite. This has already been done for you in the starter kit package. Let's rename this image game object to gold coin image. And let's reduce its size to 30 by 30 from its rect transform component. Let's move it up on the canvas a bit using the move tool. That's fine. Now let's add a regular UI text game object to the coin score panel game object, not the gold coin image game object. So let's right click on the coin score panel game object and add a UI text game object. Let's name it coin score text. And since it's a text game object, it must be stretched against its parent rectangle, which in this case is the coin score panel rectangle in both the vertical and horizontal directions. Let's change the text color to white as usual and keep it aligned to the left and up. Let's change its size to something like 28 points. We do want to make it too big. and we'll use the same font style that we used for the distance score text, which is the San Francisco Fedora title. So drop that font into the font field of the CoinScore text game object. In the text field, let's write something like small x 800 no space. Again, this is gonna be constantly updated in the game with the number of coins that the user has collected. But we need to see how it looks first. Let's use the move tool to make the text on the same level as the gold coin image. Save and hit play. This looks decent. Okay, now let's update the text values of the distance score text and the coin score text game objects with their respective scores from inside the player control script. So open up the player control scripts in Visual Studio. First, let's include the Unity Engine.UI namespace, and then declare two public text variables that we will call distance score text and coin score text. We're gonna use these two text variables to store an instance of the distance score text game object and the coin score text game object here in the script. And now let's go to the onGUI function and delete the code for the immediate GUI UI text that displays the user scores because we're not gonna need it now. We've made our own score UI now. Let's save the changes and go back to the editor. Click on the player game object from the hierarchy, and we can see our two text variables in the inspector window of the player game object. Let's drag the distance score text game object onto the distance score text field in the player's inspector window, and also drag the coin score text game object onto the coin score text field. Save the changes and go back to Visual Studio. Now these two variables are instances of the distance score text and coin score text game objects, which means that we can adjust their respective text values from here using the .text method. So let's go to the update function and start a new line. Type distance score text .text equals distance run .toString a pair of parentheses semicolon. Now we're constantly updating the text value of the distance score text game object with the distance run value. Let's do a similar thing for the coin score text. So let's start a new line. Type coin score text equals coins collected .toString a pair of parentheses semicolon. Remember that we always have to convert our integers and floats to string if we want to display them as text, because it's the format the text variables accept. Oh, let's not forget to add our small x letter before the coin score on the same line. And one more thing, I think that I may have accidentally deleted the call for the death event function from inside the respawn button in the onGUI function. So let's put it back in. Now let's test our new UI in the editor, save the changes and go back to the Unity editor. Hit play. Looks really good. And our score texts are getting properly updated. And if we die and hit respawn, the scores get reset back to 0 and start getting updated again. Really cool. Now we would like to display a congratulatory text message at the bottom of the screen if the user beats his previous best score. So let's do that. Let's focus our scene view on our canvas, and then let's add an empty game object to the canvas game object. Let's name it Death Menu because it's going to contain UI elements that will appear only if the player dies. Let's stretch it against the entire canvas in all directions by selecting this preset from its Anchor Presets menu while holding down the Shift or Option key. And we're doing this step because we want to deactivate this Death Menu game object and all of its children game object when the game starts, and then reactivate it along with all of its children game objects again when the player dies in the game. This way, we only have to turn off one game object from the player control script, which is much easier. You'll see what I mean in a bit. Let's add a panel game object to the empty Death Menu game object because we want to reserve a portion of the canvas area to our congratulatory text messages. Let's select the Rect tool from up here and then adjust the size of our panel. We want our congratulatory text to occupy this area of the canvas. Let's anchor our panel to the bottom center of our canvas. Let's also change its width to say 1000. And then rename it in the hierarchy to Best Coin Score Notification Panel. It's a bit mouthful, but that's okay. And this panel, of course, is going to hold the text that's going to let the user know if he or she has beaten his previous best coin collecting score. Finally, let's turn off the image component of this panel, and now we'll add our text that's going to let the user know if they have beaten their previous best coin collecting score inside our panel. So right click on the Best Coin Score Notification Panel game object and then add a text game object to it. Let's name our text game object Best Coin Score Notification Text. Sorry that I picked a long name, but you could name it anything you like really. Let's stretch it in all directions against the area occupied by its parent game object, which is the Best Coin Score Notification Panel game object from its Anchor presets in the inspector window while holding down the Shift or Option key. Now this text game object is trapped within the parameters of the Best Coin Score Notification Panel game object. Let's change the color of the text to white and increase its size to 32 points maybe. Let's align it to the center of the panel and put it in the middle. Also, let's change the font to San Francisco Fedora title. Sorry that I skipped showing you that step. Let's make our best coin score notification text display some string text just so that we could see how it's gonna look in the game before we go ahead and change it from inside the player control script. So let's go to its text field and type congrats, exclamation mark, your new best coin score is, colon. Save the changes and hit play. Looks really good. Let's exit play mode. And now we'll repeat the same process to display the congratulatory message that's gonna let the user know if they had beaten their previous best distance score. So let's select the best coin score notification panel game object from the hierarchy and then duplicate it. Let's rename the new duplicated panel game object to best distance score notification panel. I rename its children text game object to best distance score notification text. Let's move the new panel game object over the old panel on the canvas using the move tool, and then select its children text game object, which is the best distance score notification text game object. Let's go to its text input field and update it so that it reads something like, wow, exclamation mark, your new best running distance score is, colon, 8,000 meter. Save the changes and hit play. This looks good. Let's exit play mode. Now we'll go to the player controller script and adjust the text values of both the best coin score notification text and best distance score notification text game objects so that they display the right congratulatory messages with the updated best score values and only if the player dies in the game. So let's open up the player controller script in Visual Studio. First, we'll create a public text variable that we will call best distance score text. We'll use this variable to reference the best distance score notification text game object and then change its text input from here in the script. Similarly, we'll create another public text variable called best coin score text, which will be used as an instance of the best coin score notification text here in the script. Finally, we'll create a public game object variable that we will call death menu. We'll use this variable to control our death menu game object here in the script. I mean, turn it off and on. Notice how we're separating the public and private variables. And we're also separating classes and structs from regular variables. We are also grouping like variables under each other. This is a small exercise, but its effects on the development process is significant. Always make sure that your code is neat and easy to read because it can become hairy very quickly and you'll just get confused. Now let's save the changes and go back to the editor and initialize these public variables with their proper game objects. Let's select the player game object from the hierarchy, and you can see our newly added public fields in the player controller script component of our player game object. Drag the best distance score notification text game object onto the best distance score text field of our player game object. Next, drag the best coin score notification text game object onto the best coin score text field of our player game object. Lastly, drag the death menu game object from the hierarchy onto the death menu public field of our player game object. Save the changes. Now we can control and adjust each of these game objects from our player control script in different ways. Let's go back to our player control script in Visual Studio. The first thing we want to do now is deactivate the death menu game object and all of its children game objects when the game first starts, because we should only see the congratulatory messages if the player dies in the game. So let's go to the start function and add a new line at the end. Type death menu .set active, open a parentheses, false, semicolon. This death menu variable is an instance of the death menu game object, so we could use its setActive method to activate or deactivate it based on our will. Now let's go to the ongoing function and reactivate the death menu game object here in this if statement, because when we are on this if statement, it means that the player has died in the game. And so the death menu should appear. Type death menu .set active, open a parentheses, true, semicolon. And finally, we want to deactivate the death menu if the user chooses to respawn the game. So let's go to the death event function, because it's called only when the user hits the respawn button, and deactivate the death menu first thing the same way we did in the start function. Let's save the changes and see if everything we did checks out in the editor. Hit play. As you can see, the death menu is inactive when the game first starts, and if the player dies, then the death menu is reactivated. And we'll fix the congratulatory messages soon, so don't worry about that. Let's respawn, and as you can see, the death menu is still active. We'll fix that right now in Visual Studio. Let's exit play mode and go back to Visual Studio. What we want to do now is condition the visibility of the congratulatory messages to only when the user achieves a new best score in the game. And the best place to do that in this script is inside the save score function, because here, as you can see, we're already checking if the user has broken his previous best scores. So let's go to the if statement that checks if the user has achieved a new best coin collecting score and start a new line at its end. Let's display the following text if the user has beaten his previous best coin collecting score. Type best coin score text equals So now we're adjusting the text input of the best coin score notification text game object. Type, pair of quotation marks, wow, exclamation point, you've achieved a new best score of, space. And then display the value stored in the coins collected variable as a string. Now let's go inside this if statement, which checks if the user has a new best running score, and add a new line here. Let's access the text input field of the best distance score notification text game object, which is referenced by the best distance score text variable here in the script. Let's display the following message if the user beats his previous best running score. Congrats, exclamation mark, you have a new best running score of, space. And then we want to display the value stored in the distance run variable because we already checked in the if statement if it's his best score. And we must convert it to a string. Let's also slap a unit onto the distance score. Let's make it in meters. Now the user will really feel like he accomplished something because it's not just a number. Okay, now for reasons that I'm not sure about, when the user respawns in the game, the congratulatory messages don't disappear with the deactivation of the death menu. So let's go to the death event function and do a workaround. Let's start a new line right after deactivating the death menu game object. And what we will do now is reset the text values of the best coin score text and best distance score text variables to empty strings so that they display empty texts when the user respawns the game. So type best coin score text dot text equals a pair of quotation marks semicolon. And the same goes for the best distance score text variable. And of course, if the user achieves a new best score in either coin collecting or running distance, then the texts of these variables will be updated in the save score function. So we don't need to worry about the right text not getting displayed. Now let's go to the start function and start a new line here, and we want to make sure that both our best coin score and best distance score are initialized to the previous best scores before the player starts running in the game. So let's set the value of the coins collected best equal to the user's previous best coin collecting score, and also set the distance run best variable equal to the user's previous best running score. Now let's save the changes to our script and go back to the editor to test what we have programmed just now. Before we hit play, I just want to clear the text in the best distance score notification text game object, and also clear the text in the best coin score notification text game object. You don't have to do that though, it's meaningless as you'll see. Let's hit play. And as expected, the death menu is inactive when the game first starts. And if we die, then nothing shows up because the user has not achieved a new best score. Let's respawn. The death menu is still inactive. Let's see if I can achieve a new best score on either coin collecting or distance run. As you can see, I'm really good at this game. Let's hope that I've collected enough coins and ran far enough. Let's hit the wall, and it looks like I've achieved a new best score in both coin collecting and distance run. So my new best running score is 351 meters. But the coin collecting score is broken for some reason. We'll fix it later. Right now, we'll continue with our tutorial. Hit respawn, and the congratulatory messages have disappeared. So it looks like everything we've programmed is working as intended, minus of course the congratulatory messages for the coin collecting score. We'll fix that soon. Right now, we'll work on replacing our ugly respawn button from the game with a revamped, sharpened new button. So right click on the death menu game object from the hierarchy, and then add a button game object. Let's change its width to 512 from its inspector window, and change its height to 128. Let's turn off its image component, and rename it to respawn button. Expand the respawn button game object and then rename its children text game object to respawn text. Change the color of the respawn text to white, increase its size to 82 points, and change its font style to snow tab caps. And finally, we'll display the word respawn, all caps, inside the button. Now let's add an exit button below this respawn button. So go ahead and duplicate the respawn button game object from the hierarchy. I rename the new duplicated button exit button, and rename its children text game object to exit text. Let's select the exit text game object and then change its text field to exit, all caps. Now let's use the move tool from up here and slide the exit button game object below the respawn button on the canvas until there is no overlapping between the two. Be careful not to mistakenly slide the exit text game object. Now let's go to Visual Studio and create a function that's gonna let the user quit the game just like we did in the previous tutorial. Let's create a new public void function down here that we will call exit app. This function will shut down the game if called. So let's invoke the application.quit method, and that is that. Let's scroll up to the onGUI function and then delete the code for the basic respawn button we've been using up until now because we now have our own respawn button. Save the changes to a script and go back to the editor. Let's select the exit button game object and then add a new action to its onClick event. We want to call this exit app function from the player control script if the exit button is clicked. The player control script is attached to the player game object. So let's drag it onto the empty game object field of our action. From the player control script component of the player game object, invoke the exit app function. So now if the user clicks the exit button in the game, the exit app function will be invoked, which will cause the game to quit. Now let's repeat the same process for the respawn button. Add a new action to its onClick event. Drag the player game object into the empty field of the action. Invoke the death event function from the player controller script if the respawn button is clicked. Oops, what is it? Oh, I know, we haven't made the death event function public yet. So let's go back to the player controller script in Visual Studio and do that. Before the function declaration, let's put the word public. Save the changes and return to the editor. Now let's see if we can find it from the onClick event. Here it is. I hope this solidifies your understanding of the concept of private and public members in object-oriented programming further. Making these kinds of mistakes can be very educational. Let's save the changes and hit play. Our death menu is inactive. And if the player dies in the game, our buttons immediately appear. If we hit the exit button, then nothing happens yet because we're still in the editor. And if we hit respawn, our player respawns just like before. And our game screen is clear, i.e. the death menu is inactive. So everything seems to be working really well. This might be a good time to fix the coin collecting congratulatory message. So let's go back to the player control script. Let's see. Oh, I see. I made a silly mistake here of setting the coins collected variable equal to the coins collected best when I should have done the opposite. So let's flip the order of this equal sign, save the changes and go back to the editor. Hit play. Let's collect a few coins. And if we die in the game now, 2 congratulatory messages appear letting us know that we have surpassed our previous best scores and also showing us our new scores. Let's see if we can display just 1 congratulatory message. Hit respawn. Let's collect some coins. And then die. And now only 1 congratulatory message appears to let us know that we have achieved a new best coin collecting score. So really our script is working flawlessly. Okay, now comes the end of this tutorial. This was probably the lengthiest tutorial in this series, or one of the lengthiest. You know, UI design is an entirely separate craft from writing code or character animation. I can understand if this aspect of game development is not your favorite. It's not mine either. But my goal for this series is to expose you to as many aspects of game development as possible, so that you can have a first-hand knowledge on what it takes to develop a game. In the next couple of tutorials, we'll program the gesture swipe and accelerometer inputs so that our game can work on mobile phones. I'll see you there. Thank you.